I Made a Monster Out of Mud. Written by Corpse Child. Every kid in every grade of every school knew there was always that one kid. The one who wanted to have friends. Rather, to have at least one. Someone to have your back, no matter what. Someone to do things with. Like play Power Rangers with you on the jungle gym at recess. That kid who, no matter what, just can't ever appeal to anyone enough to be worth their time talking to or playing with. The black sheep, I believe it's called. Well, that was me growing up. The black sheep. Though it'd be a lot more honest to say I was the king of black sheeps. That's right. Even guys like Frankie Todd, who couldn't go a single day without getting wedgied, Indian red burned, and or straight up getting a mud hole stomped into his pudgy ass on the playground by the 5th graders, wanted to play or hang around me. I guess I couldn't really blame them. Long story short, it would have been the understatement of the century to say that I didn't fit in. For starters, where all the other kids were all talking about how they stayed up late at night eating junk food and watching R-rated movies, or how their parents would let them play M-rated games, you know, cool stuff, I was the only one who was allowed 2 hours a day on electronics. And of course, God banished the thought of my mom allowing me anywhere near that stuff back then. Basically, anything that was any worse than PG-13, and even then, there were severe limits, then I was kept as far away as possible from it. Now understand that I'm not angry at my folks or anything. Overbearing a bit, sure, but it wasn't without reason. That being, they feared I'd end up in jail like my brother, sentenced to 20 years for armed robbery. Ronnie used to play GTA too, they'd always say, every time I used to ask why they were so against it. And look at him now. Mom would go on about how it was all that garbage that led him to where he was now. Being young, and perhaps far too naive for my own good, I believed her. I didn't understand how the logic worked, but I didn't try pushing it either. So while other kids were talking about GTA, Call of Duty, some even acting it out on the playground, I was acting out my childhood favorite show, Power Rangers. I was always running around by myself, punching and kicking at the air, fighting imaginary putty patrollers while the rest of them looked at me condescendingly. At lunch, I always sat at the far end of the table, alone, where other boys my age were talking to each other about how they wrecked each other at a new video game, or were talking about their favorite gory scene in a movie. I was alone, simply either reading one of my comics or drawing a scene from Power Rangers. Needless to say, I was, of course, harassed every day, usually being called Sissy or Mama's little bitch boy. That was a favorite of theirs. On a normal day, I was shoved into the wall, mocked endlessly on sight, had hornets flung at me in class, and would end up with most of my drawings torn up. If I was especially unlucky, I'd also get cornered and robbed by a group of upperclassmen in the lunchroom, and or have the absolute hell beat out of me with sticks at recess. This particular abuse was always carried out by the 3 worst offenders: Blake Kinnaman and his 2 cronies, Trenton Isaacs and Walter Voss. Like I said, nobody really liked me, but these 3 essentially got their rocks off to torturing me. there wasn't a single other kid I saw that they took more pleasure in harassing than me. And of course, being the good little Boy Scout I was, I didn't exactly try teaching them a lesson or anything like that. No, I always ran to the teachers for help, which only served to further piss them off. Something I learned the hard way after they were sentenced at one point to 5 days of after-school detention, to which I was paid back in full with them jumping me on the playground, throwing me to the ground, and kicking the crap out of me while I was down. Oh, and no one was ever willing to come to my defense either. Why would they? Why bother helping me? I was the lame, weird kid, remember? Mama's little bitch boy? Anyway, in spite of this, I learned how to get used to it. I didn't change who I was to fit in. Instead, anytime I wanted to try and make friends or engage with others, I'd just stick to what I liked, what I was interested in. In short, I was me, and that wouldn't change just to make others want to hang out with me. That said, though, it did start to get a little lonely after a while. It'd be nice, I thought, to have at least one friend, you know? One person to play with me. Someone who'd actually be interested in the same things I was. I'd be lying if I said that didn't start to really make my 4th grade days a lot less enjoyable. That's where she'd first come into the picture. Jen. She was the first real best friend I ever made, as well as the biggest mistake I ever made. A mistake that may now cost me dearly. It was a Friday, and it was one of the unlucky days I mentioned earlier. I was curled in a ball, trying pathetically to shield my face as best I could while getting beaten on all sides like a damn piñata by the 3 of them. I think it was because I apparently didn't have as much money on me that day as what he was requiring from me when he shook me down. By the time they were done with me, I was quivering on the ground, covered in welts and bruises. About 10 minutes or so passed by with me just laying in the dirt like that, not sure I even wanted to get back up. Eventually, though, the bell rang, signaling us to head to our last class of the day. I finally managed to pick myself back up and trudge back into the school building. When my last period teacher asked what had happened to me, I didn't say anything. I'm pretty sure she knew, though. Regardless, she sent me to the nurse's office where I ended up spending the remainder of the day. The nurse had been by then somewhat used to having me make visits to her office because of my injuries at their hands. She used to tell me to stay as far away from them as possible. I told her I always tried to, which I did, but they always found me anyways, just to beat me up and harass me. After she was done bandaging me up, she gave me a cherry-flavored dum-dum and let me sit in her office until the dismissal bell rang, where I'd ride my bus home. On the bus, I spent my time drawing my favorite characters from my Power Rangers comic. I remember one of the pages showing Rita Repulsa making one of her monsters come to life using clay. That was when an idea came to me. What if I could do that? What if I could make a friend out of clay? They'd always be my friend, no matter what. They'd like the same stuff as me, and best of all, they'd be there to help stand up to Blake and the others. Look, call me what you want. Desperate, foolish, stupid, or straight up psychotic. But I was damn near willing to sell my soul by then, just to have someone as a friend. When I got home that day, I decided to try it for myself. Because it was a Friday night, I knew that my folks would be working late, leaving me alone until at least 9 or 10:30, when Mom would get home. Funny enough, they actually trusted me to have the house to myself for a few hours, as well as trusting that I'd be in bed when they'd come home. This meant that I didn't have to worry about them interfering with my sorcery, something my devout Christian mother had absolutely no tolerance for. I went outside with one of my mom's gardening trowels and began chipping away at the dirt, piling as much of it as I could into my old sandcastle buckets from when I was 5. It wasn't easy either, because most of the ground wasn't your average dirt. Because we lived in an old Catawba territory, most of the ground was red clay. This meant trying to dig through it was almost like trying to chip away at a stone block. It took hours, and by the time I'd managed to fill up 3.5 of my 5 buckets, the sun had already begun to set. Quickly, I ran back inside and hopped in the shower, stashing the buckets in my room. Afterwards, I changed into my pajamas and quickly wolfed down 2 pepperoni Totinos before heading back to my room to begin making my new best friend. I looked at the clock and saw that it was already getting on 8:15. This meant I wouldn't have much time to pull my little scheme off, having to make sure I was in bed by at least 9:15 to avoid Ma's wrath. Quickly, I dumped the clay into the middle of my bedroom floor and began sculpting it into the shape of a person. After about 20 minutes, I'd managed to mold the clay into the form of a girl, or at least the closest resemblance of a girl I could manage. Her face was square-shaped and blocky, with an equally block-shaped nose, and her eyes ended up being 2 large balls of the excess clay that wasn't used molding the rest of her. Her body was more or less the same, with it resembling a bulky sort of hourglass shape, and her hands and feet were basically large bricks attached to the ends of long, wide, rectangular limbs. I guess I thought it'd be the closest thing I'd ever get to having an actual girlfriend. That, and I wanted to have a friend who could be the Pink Ranger when we played. Then I set to spending the remainder of my time that night attempting a wide mix of crazy antics to try and make my creation come to life. This ranged from saying prayers to God to chanting aloud, "Magic wand, make my friend grow," and even using the old Boy Scout pocket knife I got back in 2nd grade to cut my hand and smear blood across its face. As you can imagine, none of these worked. Regardless, I was too pig-headed to give up that easily. Unfortunately, in my determination, I'd forgotten to check the time, so you can imagine the absolute horror on my parents', especially my mother's, face when they came home that night to see me in the roof of the house attempting to detach the TV antenna, thinking I was gonna Frankenstein my new friend to life. After a drawn-out ass-ripping, which ended in me being grounded for at least the next week, I trudged back upstairs to my room. When I was asked what in the name of God in heaven I was doing, I didn't dare tell them what I was actually trying to do. At best, she'd have been too livid to even pay much attention to what I told her, and she'd just think I was blowing smoke. At worst, though, and probably much more likely with my luck, she'd have sacked my room, taking away and getting rid of anything that was even remotely not holy, and forcing me to read the Bible cover to cover every day. No, instead I just told her I was defending our house from the putty patrollers, and that the antenna was some sort of super weapon or something. Lame as hell, I know. But to my credit, she seemed to at least accept this enough to not try to press me for the truth. When I got back to my room, the lifeless mold still laid in the center of my floor. "Some friend you are," I whispered bitterly. All I was wanting was a friend. Just one pal that'd want to play with me, who wouldn't make my everyday miserable at school. I was even willing to sell my goddamn soul for that. Yet, there I was, staring at an inanimate pile of mud on my bedroom floor. I literally couldn't even make a new friend if I tried. That's when my eyes started burning with tears of frustration and hopelessness. For a moment, I just stood there like this, crying over the body mold, before delivering a swift kick to its ribs and slumping into my bed, defeated. I ended up quietly crying myself to sleep that night, but was awakened only a few hours later to the sounds of thumping. It sounded like it was close, whatever it was. I could hear it coming from across the room at my door. I had no flashlight, and I was still too tired to want to get up to turn the light off. As well as this, I noticed that it didn't really walk so much as sort of drag its feet along while barely lifting its feet. Because of this, I figured it was just Dad heading to the bathroom for the 5th time like usual and went back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately noticed something was up. For starters, my door was now open, despite the fact that I knew damn well I shut it the previous night. Then, looking down, I was hit by a tidal wave of shock when I saw that the clay mold wasn't in the middle of the floor anymore. I almost jumped out of my bed and began looking around my room. Where the hell did it go? I was in a frenzy. What happened to it? I'd left it right there, in the middle of my bedroom floor. It's not like it just got up and walked away, right? In my panic, I ended up glancing again at my open door. That was when I was able to notice the brown streaks leading out of the room and into the hallway. When I went into the hallway, I could see more of them tracked all the way to the stairs and down into the living room. It was while I was descending the stairs that I heard the sounds of thumping from the previous night coming from the kitchen. From about midway down the stairs, I was able to peer over the railing and into the dining room. I still couldn't see into the actual kitchen yet, but I saw the tracks leading into it. Suddenly, I heard another series of banging sounds. Hello? Mom? Dad? Is that you? There was no answer, only more banging sounds. Admittedly, part of me wondered how this hadn't already woken Mom and Dad up, given that their room was right next to the kitchen. I then saw that their room, too, was open, which told me they must have gone out early to run errands or something. This sent me into goosebumps. If not Mom or Dad, then who the hell was in my house, tearing up the kitchen? When I was almost at the bottom of the stairs, I heard the dragging, thumping sounds again, heading towards me from the kitchen. I slowly and quietly began backpedaling back up the stairs as the thump, dragging noise came closer and closer into the dining room out of the kitchen. I'd almost made it back up the stairs enough to where I couldn't see out to the dining room anymore, when, from out the kitchen, a large brown block emerged, followed by another. I knelt down, frozen, frightened, and very much confused. The 2 blocks moved forward again, and what I saw come into the dining room damn near made my heart stop dead. It was my creation. My new friend. She was alive. But how? I wasn't sure what to do. I was still paralyzed with pure shock. Half of me wanted to dash the rest of the way screaming back to my room, while the other half wanted to rush down the stairs to her. I watched her enter the dining room and turn her head from side to side, scanning the room. Then she slowly trudged over to the table and reached out to grab the vase in the middle that Mom kept her peonies in. When she tried grabbing it though, her blocky hand instead ended up knocking it over into the floor, shattering it. She looked down at it and knelt down like she was going to try picking up the pieces. Like before though, she could only brush the broken shards with her hands. After about half a minute of this, my legs finally found some hidden strength or motivation to move again, and I was backing up the stairs again. At one point, I misstepped and slipped, letting out a startled yelp as I desperately seized the railing. That was when I saw her head immediately snap up to me, meeting me eye to eye for the first time. I think my heart actually did stop then, at least for a few drawn-out seconds. In that moment, I swear time had actually stopped. Everything was supernaturally still and silent, with me and her locked in a seemingly never-ending staring contest. Then, I watched her cock her head to the side, all Michael Myers-like, before outstretching one of her bricked arms to me and using the other one to point to herself, specifically to her ribs. Hello? I couldn't think of anything else to say, or even do for that matter. She just continued staring at me blankly. To say that I was lost would be a grievous understatement. I was beyond lost, to the point of being completely mind-fucked. Admittedly, the only thing keeping me from passing this whole thing off as probably my most bizarre dream ever was when I pinched myself hard enough to end up leaving a bruise. How was this possible? What happened? What was it that made her come to life? She cocked her head to the other side before beginning to shamble towards the stairs. I didn't move, finding myself once again rooted to the spot on the stairs where I was. Eventually, she reached the bottom of the stairs and started up to me. A little ways up, she caught one of her feet on a step and stumbled down, continuing forward on her hands and knees. Finally, she reached me and outstretched one of her hands to me, sort of patting the top of my head. Pretty much without thinking, like a reflex almost, I shot up and bolted back to my room, slamming and using my body to block the door. Despite what I said earlier, I was still in disbelief. This couldn't be happening, I told myself. This isn't real. Come on, snap out of it. Bang! 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 This snapped me out of my thoughts. From the other side, I could feel the door bulging outward against my body. What the? Bang! 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 This time, I could hear the wood on the door starting to splinter against the hinges. It felt and sounded like who or whatever was trying to get through was using a battering ram against it. Another series of blows almost caused the door to break away completely. That was when I finally decided to open the door. I opened it to just a crack, just enough to peek out and see her standing there, holding up her boulder of a hand. For a moment, she just stood there again, motionless, silent. Who? What are you? I asked nervously, fully opening the door now. She said nothing, only cocking her head to the side again and pointing one hand to me while touching her rib with the other. What? I don't get it. She opened the door the rest of the way, her head straightened before then outstretching both arms out to me. Before I knew it, her moist dirt arms were wrapped around me, squeezing tighter and tighter I realized when I felt myself being lifted off the ground and ragdolled like I was a stuffed animal that she was trying to give me a hug. Confused, frightened, and not at all aware of what I should have done next, I simply returned the hug as much as I could. Sure enough, this seemed to work, and I was slowly set back down. After taking a second to catch my breath, having damn near suffocated in her bear hug, I repeated my question. "Who are you?" She just did the thing again, where she pointed one hand to me and the other to her rib. "What? I don't understand. What are you trying to say?" She stepped closer, touching my chest with her outstretched hand and tapping her rib with her other hand. I then felt a sharp kick to my right leg that felt like I'd been hit with a sack of bricks. "Ow! What the heck?" I cried as I cradled my leg. She kept pointing to her ribs. Through the pain in my leg, something started to click in my head as to what she was trying to tell me. I realized that she wasn't just pointing to her ribs, she was pointing to where I'd kicked her last night before I went to bed. Was she trying to say that was how she was brought to life? How did me kicking her out of all the other harebrained schemes I tried manage to give her life? I created you, I said, more as an uneasy question than a statement. Her head straightened again and nodded before attempting to get me in another bear hug. I backed away, holding up my hands like a hostage and saying, "Please don't touch me." She stopped and dragged her arms to her sides, staring at me silently. I stared back, not saying anything else. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I mean, how was this even real? I couldn't even begin processing how this was happening. Just a few hours ago, this thing was just a pile of mud on my bedroom floor. And now, after kicking her of all things, here she was. "What are you gonna do now?" I finally asked. She turned and walked back towards the kitchen where she came from. I finally found it in me to move again, and I followed after her. I was instantly paralyzed in horror again from what I saw. The entire kitchen was completely trashed. Everywhere, all over the floors and across the counters, were shards of glass, most of them being from either the jars of pickles from the fridge or from my folks' alcohol cabinet. As well as this, just about everything from the fridge had been scattered all across the floor and walls. "They're gonna kill me for this! What the hell did you do?" She knelt down again and seemed to be trying to pick up the pieces again. Like before, her brick-like fingerless hands were only able to brush over them, even further crushing some of them. "Stop!" I exclaimed, rushing over to her, carefully trying to avoid the broken glass. "You're making it worse!" I retrieved the broom and dustpan and set about sweeping up the mess my new friend had caused. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, watching me as I worked. This frustrated me immensely. "Well, you gonna help or not? This is your mess!" To this, she looked down and tried scooping up the glass again. "Never mind, I'll do it. You just..." I looked around for a moment and told her to go outside or something. She immediately turned and shambled out of the kitchen, leaving a dirt trail behind her as she walked. Great! More I have to clean up before Mom and Dad see. When she reached the front door, I heard the thudding of her hands hitting the knob, failing to grab it to turn. This caused me to have to stop and let her out before going back to cleaning up the mess. I will say one thing right now. Red clay is a right pain in the ass to scrub off the floor, especially when it's tracked all across the house. Because of this, it took almost 2 hours just to clean up behind her. Finally, though, I'd managed to get most of that, as well as the broken glass picked up. More to my luck, Mom and Dad were still gone by that time, too. I decided then to go outside to see if she was still around. At first, I thought she had actually ran away, and I wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to actually try to find her again. On one hand, she honestly gave me a bit of an unsettling feeling. I couldn't tell whether it was still just the bizarre nature of it all, or the whole, holy shit, this thing is actually alive, or the way she wouldn't speak or make a sound, but something was off, nonetheless. At the same time, though, I created her, and yes, she was supposed to be my friend. That was why, in the end, I chose to look for her. Fortunately, she didn't actually require me to really look for her. I found her behind the house, knocking her hands against one of the trees in the backyard. She looked like she was trying to knock it down out of frustration. Eventually, I noticed that this particular tree was splintering away, even starting to tilt over a bit. This was bad news because this particular tree was located just a yard or two from the house. This meant if I didn't stop her, my house was going to have a tree as a new resident. Stop! She froze, looking over to me. I ran over to her. What are you doing? She brought both of her blocky hands up to her face, covering her eyes and running away. I realized she was crying. Wait! I called, following her. Where are you going? She stopped again and turned her head around to look behind her back to me. I caught up to her and put a hand on her shoulders. Hey, don't cry. I'm sorry if I was mean to you. You just scare me a little is all. She turned around to face me. I put my hand out to her. I'm Alex, but my friends, well, I guess you can just call me Xander. Her head tilted down to look at my hand and back to me. Then she outstretched her arms and seized me in another crushing bear hug. I returned the hug, demanding to be let go before being released again. You sure are strong, I remarked, chuckling nervously. What's your name? There was no answer from her. Instead, she tilted her head to the left and shook. No name, huh? That's when I decided I'd give her a name myself. I started cycling through every girly-sounding name in the book. Eventually, I just settled on one that sounded simple and easy to remember. How about Jennifer? Jen for short. That sound cool to you? She touched the slit I carved for her mouth before nodding. Cool. Jen it is. She responded to this by putting her hands to her temples, mimicking the shocked expression. So, what do you want to do now, Jen? She put her hand to her mouth again before walking to the tree again. She reared back, about to try hitting it, when I ran over and stopped her. She looked at me, cocking her head in confusion. I got a better idea, I said. How about we play Power Rangers? I'll be the Red Ranger. You can be either the pink or the yellow one. Which one do you want? She stood motionless. Right, can't talk. How about you be yellow? I asked her. She touched her mouth again before nodding. Awesome. Come on, it's morphin' time. I shot my arms out and shouted, Tyrannosaurus! When I looked over to Jen, she wasn't moving. Well, aren't you gonna morph? She cocked her head, confused. I'd forgotten that, since she was still technically a newborn, I was gonna have to teach her stuff, like how to play Power Rangers. I walked up to her and shot my arms out again. You see, just go like this and shout the name of your Zord. Yours is Saber-Toothed Tiger. She thrusted her arms out like mine. Yeah, that's it. Now come on, we have to stop those putties. With that, I began punching and kicking the air wildly. At first, Jen just watched me before finally mimicking my movements, flailing her own arms in the air. For what felt like hours, we just ran around the yard together, fighting bad guys. I'll admit, it actually was kind of fun, finally having another person to play with. Unfortunately, this was also where things first went haywire. I remember being in the heat of battle when, from up the street, I could hear Blake and his two cronies hollering as they came down on their bikes. This caused me to actually piss myself in fear. In all my excitement, I'd forgotten all about their little street sweep routine. This was an almost ritualistic practice in which those three would bomb up and down the neighborhood on their bikes, stopping only when they saw an unlucky victim to pummel the absolute shit out of. They did it every weekend, usually changing the times with each occasion. In other words, us neighborhood kids can't keep track of when they'd be coming every Saturday and Sunday afternoon. It'd be completely random, out of the fucking blue, with the only warning to get to safety being their shouts as they rode in. I, myself, had always been fortunate that I seemed to be able to dodge them. That said, I'd seen just how viciously they'd essentially brutalized some of the others who weren't so lucky. Let me put it this way. Remember the ways in which I described their abuses of me on the playground at school? Well, imagine that, plus a whole lot more because off-school property, they'd get away with it. And now, it looked like I was finally going to have my own experience with it. As they got closer, yet not slowing down, I thought they might pass me by. Nope. As soon as they reached the edge of my front yard, they made sharp U-turns into my backyard, cutting me off and surrounding me. Well, boys, Blake said with a wolfish grin blast on his face, look at what we got here. If it ain't Mama's little bitch boy, Tridden replied from behind me. They hopped off their bikes and started towards me. I frantically threw my head in every direction to no use. With Tridden, who towered above me at 6 feet tall, school football team star quarterback Walter at my left, and Blake, who, mind you, was on a track team outside of school and was a black belt already in both karate and aikido, I was every flavor of screwed. Just as I was going to try and make a break for it, I was grabbed from behind, my arms being tightly pinned backwards. Whoa there, Tridden chided. And just where the hell are you running off to, huh? Yeah, Walter added. Why don't you stay a while? He followed this up with a swift hook to my gut that took the wind out of me. Oh, what's wrong, Runt? Huh? Don't want to play? He hit me again, this time in the face. This one actually left me dazed for a moment. Well, boys, Blake announced. What do you think we should do with the trash here? Slowly, my head lolled around, looking for Jen. She was gone. Jen? I groaned. Blake cupped his hand to his ear. What was that? You gotta speak up. I don't speak little bitch boy language. He turned to the other two. How about you guys? They shrugged in response, giggling. Blake himself shrugged, before swinging yet another blow to my stomach, this time forcing me to my knees. Tridden finally let go of me, causing me to fold into a fetal position, clutching my stomach. Tridden used this opportunity to kick me in the face. Instantly, my nose was busted wide open, and everything was blurry. Oh my God! Walter exclaimed. Look, the little pussy wind pissed himself! They all three busted up laughing. I was aching all over now and was starting to feel myself slipping into unconsciousness. Where are you, Jen? Blake finally piped up again. I know. From now on, your name is Pussy McPisspants. What do you think, huh? I didn't answer. Instead, my mouth hung slack and my head swam. "What's wrong? You deaf and dumb too?" He slapped me across the face hard. "Oh, I get it," he said condescendingly. "The little sissy's embarrassed." The other two giggled at this while Blake jerked me up like a rag doll. "I think we should help him." He nodded, and the other two walked up behind me. I felt my pants be yanked down to my ankles. "There! Problem solved." That was when I felt my eyes start to burn with tears. I couldn't help it. There I was getting pushed around yet again, and yet again I was alone. Even Jen abandoned me. "Are you fucking kidding me right now? Are you seriously about to cry?" He pinched the bridge of his nose, disgusted. "Okay, you know what? Screw this. This is getting lame now. You two do something with this little shit. I'm out." I was grabbed by the other two and dragged over to one of the trees. "Get the rope from the bag," Walter ordered. I watched Trenton retrieve a rope from his backpack, and I tried to squirm free to no purpose. Walter hit me in the jaw again, knocking me dizzy while Trenton hoisted and tied my wrists up to one of the lower hanging branches. I could feel the rope digging into the skin of my wrists, causing them, as well as the rest of my arms, to quickly go numb. I felt my shirt get yanked upward to expose my bare chest before feeling the cold, wet felt of a marker going across it. "And done. What do you think?" Walter declared. Blake and Trenton barked with laughter. "Here, let me see it real quick," Trenton said. I looked down to see that my chest now read "Piss Pants," with an arrow pointing down my stomach. I looked back up to see Trenton approaching me with the marker, a devious grin on his face, when suddenly he stops dead, just a foot or two away from me. "The hell?" His face was the dictionary definition of bewildered. "Who the hell are you?" I lulled my head as much as I could to try and look behind me. I couldn't see much with the tree blocking most of my view, but from just out of the corner of my eye, I could see the vague outline of a short, reddish-brown person. "Jen!" I groaned pitifully. "Aw, is this your girlfriend, Piss Pants?" Blake scoffed. "Wow, gotta wonder how that happened." He then looked to her and started whistling and making lewd gestures toward her, humming the air and twitching his tongue between his index and middle fingers. "What's wrong with her, huh? She don't like a good time?" He scoffed again before saying, "Guess not if she's with a prissy little bitch boy like you." He then threw his hand over in a summoning motion, and the trio headed back to their bikes, speeding off. I was left tied to the tree branch. By then, my arms felt close to being ripped from their sockets. I didn't try struggling, instead opting to just hang there, weeping. I heard Jen walk up beside me. "How come you didn't help?" She cocked her head to the side in confusion, putting her hand to her mouth. I started yanking down on the branch until it snapped, and I was finally freed. "You know what? Forget it. You're not a real friend. Go away. I don't want to see you anymore." I said it this time with venom. I meant it too. All of it. She slowly straightened again and stood still, staring at me. "Well?" I shouted. "Get lost!" I then turned and headed back inside, stealing one last glance over my shoulder. She just stood there. I went back inside and cleaned myself up before slumping up to my room and wallow in my self-pity. At some point, I must have nodded off. I was awakened, though, when I heard the front door opening. I remember seeing flashing lights from outside my bedroom window. When I shuffled downstairs to the living room, I remember seeing Mom and Dad standing at the door with 2 police officers on the porch. "Mom? Dad?" I said, snapping their attention towards me. I could tell their faces were of great worry or concern. "What's going on?" Dad quickly came over to me and led me back to my room. I wanted to go back down and keep pressing, but Dad's grip on my wrist was tight. "Dad, what's wrong?" He didn't say anything. And when we got up to my room, he told me to stay put and they'd be up later to talk about it. His face looked petrified, almost like he was scared to look at me. "What happened?" "Don't come out until we come back," he said, his breath noticeably shaking. I was confused and scared at the same time. My brain was surfing through so many questions at that moment that I'm surprised I didn't drop into a panic attack. What was going on? Why were the police here? Why were they looking at me so weirdly? Did I do something wrong? I waited for what felt like forever, until finally I heard the front door close downstairs, followed up with the flashing lights going away. That's when I heard them stomping up the stairs. Suddenly, my door was flung open, and Mom and Dad stormed into my room, immediately seizing me into a tight embrace. "Honey, are you okay?" Mom asked me, her voice shaking. I just froze up. My heart was hammering 3 times as hard as normal. "Mom, what's going on?" She looked to Dad and then back to me. Dad was the one to speak first. "Son, were you outside this afternoon?" I nodded my head. "What happened?" I then told them that I was just outside playing like usual. I, of course, didn't mention the whole Gen thing. He then asked me if anything happened to me while I was outside, if I saw or spoke to anyone else while I was out there. I shook my head. "No." "You sure? Because the police said that they saw you outside with the boys from up the street." "Oh," I said timidly. "Yeah, Blake." "Did you invite Blake to come over?" I shook my head wildly. "You sure?" "Yeah, he and his buddies always ride down the street." "And what were you and Blake doing? Was he nice to you?" I sank further into Mom's arms. I shook my head, telling them about the ways he harasses me at school. I felt Mom's arms tightening around me. "Have you been telling your teachers?" "Yeah, but that made them more angry at me." "I see," he replied, sighing. He took a deep breath and said, "Now, son, I want you to be completely honest with me. Did you try to get back at them for what they did to you today?" I shook my head. "Are you sure? You know it's better to come clean about stuff like this." "I promise. I've never tried to fight Blake. Or anybody." I was now the most confused I'd ever been up to that point. Besides, of course, that morning, seeing Jen for the first time. "What's going on? Am I in trouble?" Dad ruffled my hair with a half smile. "No, you're not in trouble. But we'd like you to stay indoors for a while, until this mess blows over." I cocked my head at him. "Mess?" I was starting to get irritated with Dad beating around the bush. He sighed again and said that Blake's house had just been broken into and that someone had attacked the family. He said that the paramedics were even called out there. My eyes went wide, color draining from my face. As big as Blake himself was, not to mention that his dad was a former Marine, to hear that they'd been attacked and hospitalized was horrifying. Who could have done this, and why? Don't get me wrong, I wasn't a fan of the kid, obviously, but I didn't want to see him hurt, or worse, either. Call me a softie, weakling, whatever. I was always the type of kid that would rather keep feebly trying to make peace with you rather than getting payback, you know? At least not like this. Who? We don't know yet. That's why we'd like you to stay inside for a while, okay? Just until they find who did this. They then left the room, leaving me on my bed. Needless to say, sleep wasn't an option that night. I stayed wide-eyed the entire night, imagining what sort of brute attacked the Kinnamans, and why. Worse yet was the question of what would happen to me. Was I next? That Monday, the entire school was in an uproar. Now keep in mind, this was of course still the dark ages before social media was real prevalent, at least among kids, where everything you learned about people was through word of mouth. That said, stuff like this, in such a small town, still didn't take long to pass around like the plague. Everywhere, it was all people could talk about. In the hallways, at lunch, and at recess, everyone was talking about the incident at Blake's house. I heard people whispering about how a maniac broke into their house and tortured him and his family. Others talked about how there was apparently blood and guts everywhere. Obviously, most of it was just that, whispers and speculation. They didn't actually know anything outside of the fact that somebody broke into the house and attacked them. Some even went as far as to say that it was someone from the school, one of our peers. Some sort of revenge scheme. You can probably see where this is going. It wasn't long before the playground at recess ended up serving as a breeding spot for witch hunts to find the supposed culprit. I managed to dodge most of them for a while. Perhaps being the Black Sheep King helped. Being that I must have been so unnoticed by most people that they didn't even think Blake wasted time abusing me. Unfortunately, there were still 2 people who knew this wasn't the case. About halfway into recess, while I'd managed to isolate myself at the far edge of the playground, Walter and Trenton ambushed me, cornering me and throwing me to the ground. They immediately started taking turns kicking and stomping me into the ground. "You like that, bitch boy?" Trenton shouted. "How does it feel, huh? Answer me!" Trenton then hoisted me up by my throat. His eyes bore into mine, red veins spiderwebbing across the whites of them like he had rabies. And I could even see spittle frothing at his mouth. "You did it, didn't you? He's dead because of you!" Even as paralyzed with fear as I already was, I could still feel an all-new chill crawl down my spine hearing this. "Blake's dead?" I choked out pitifully. Part of me was hoping he was just overreacting with all the rumors going around. But at the same time, I knew by the way he shook with rage, with unfiltered hatred, that he wasn't bullshitting here. "That's right, you little shit," Walter spat, also shaking with rage like Trenton. "And now you're gonna join him." Trenton, after getting one more good swing into my stomach, slammed me to the ground. My body was racking with pain all over, and that last punch caused me to start wheezing. I looked up and my eyes almost shot out of their sockets when I saw Walter walking towards me with a large stick in his hands, handing it to Trenton. I didn't do it!" I whimpered. It was no use, though. I might as well have not said anything. Nothing I said or did was gonna save me now. "Say goodbye, bitch boy!" Trenton raised the stick over his head, before slamming it down square in between my legs. I immediately shrieked harder than I'd ever had before. He then kicked me in the face, screaming at me to shut up. My vision exploded, and everything was one big blurry cloud. The stick came down again, this time on my left shoulder. I immediately went numb, feeling like it had been replaced with a spaghetti noodle. The last time it struck me was in the middle of my chest, causing me to gasp desperately for air. I closed my eyes as I faintly saw Triton raising the stick for another swing. Before he could, though, I heard the teacher shouting, "Stop!" followed by running footsteps approaching. I ended up losing consciousness, but not before hearing Triton being dragged away, screaming, "You're dead, bitch boy! You hear me? You're fucking dead!" When I woke up again, I was surrounded by paramedics, with the teacher and the school nurse. "He's coming too!" the one standing over me shouted. I slowly raised my head, wincing in pain. "Hey there, take it easy. Can you take a deep breath for me?" I did. "Okay, good. Now look at my fingers." He held up 2 fingers and asked me how many I saw. I told him 2, and then he shined a light in my eyes. Finally, they declared that, aside from a dislocated, possibly fractured shoulder, that I was all right. They left after my arm was bandaged, and my folks were called to come pick me up. When they came, barely even 5 minutes after being called, the principal explained what happened and that I was being sent home for the day. When asked what was going to happen to Triton, they explained that he was being suspended, pending expulsion. The principal said that any criminal charges would be left to their discretion. We left, Mom almost in tears. The ride home was silent. When we got home, Mom went inside the house while Dad sat me down on the porch next to him. "So," he said calmly, "want to tell me about today?" For a moment, it was silent. Truthfully, no, I didn't want to talk about it. "Hey," I began, my voice quivering. "I think I broke into Blake's house. I killed him." Dad took a deep breath, furrowing his eyebrows, thinking of what to say next. "Is that true, Dad? Is Blake dead?" "So they told you that, huh?" He glanced at me, and then back to the yard. He sighed and said, "I'm afraid so." I felt my heart fall like a stone into the pit of my stomach. "I won't lie to you here, son. It was bad, what happened to him. And they think you had something to do with it?" I nodded. "Uh-huh. Everybody was talking about it. They think I was trying to get back at him for yesterday in the backyard." "Why's that?" I shrugged. "Because I was the one they loved to beat up the most." "Oh, yeah," he said with a dry laugh. "They think I did it. Now they're gonna..." "The hell they are," Dad blurted. I went silent. My parents had never cussed while talking to me before. With that, he turned and went back into the house. I sat for another short moment before something caught my eye. Across the street, shuffling slowly towards the front yard, was Jen. Immediately, I stood up and leaned closer to get a closer look. She met gaze with me and stopped dead, cocking her head to the side and touching her rib while pointing at me with the other hand. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to go to her, even though I'd told her to get lost. I guess, despite her abandoning me, I still considered her as my only friend. In the end, I decided to go to her. "What are you doing here?" I stopped, my eyebrows cocked in confusion, when I saw her covered in weird spots or stains. "What's all over you?" She responded by looking down at herself, and then thrusting her hands out in the morphin gesture I taught her. Needless to say, I was confused. What are you doing? We're not playing Power Rangers right now." She thrusted her arms out again before flailing her arms and legs, punching and kicking the air. As I was watching her, my eyes caught something that made me start to feel anxious. On her back was a small hole, one that looked like it'd been an entry wound for a bullet. I put my hands on Jen's shoulders, forcing her to stand still again. "What happened? Where did you get these?" She responded the same way as before, by attacking the air. I was about to lose my cool and start shouting at her when I saw her then gesture one hand towards the ground while repeatedly striking the ground with the other hand. That's when wheels started turning in my head. She was trying to tell me something. She kept punching the ground until she suddenly spun around, throwing a hard left hook behind her. Was she attacked? Then I noticed that she was holding her blocky hand poised to strike, almost teasingly, before slamming the ground with a force that actually caused the ground to shake. That's when it hit me. She wasn't attacked. She was the attacker. I looked at the stains on her body again. Is this blood? From there, it wasn't long before I realized what she was telling me. I knew there was only one conclusion as to where she went yesterday afternoon after I sent her away. "It's you, wasn't it?" I exclaimed, horrified. "You killed Blake!" She held out her arms to try and embrace me. "Get away from me! You're a monster! I'm gonna tell the police!" I turned and bolted back to the house. When I got back inside, I slammed the door and hastily locked it before looking out the window to see if I was being chased. She just stood there at the top of the yard, staring motionless at me. "I know who did it!" I shouted, rushing over to my parents. They looked to me, startled. "I know who killed Blake and his family!" "What do you mean?" Dad asked. I took his hand and began dragging him to the window. "Over there, at the top of the yard." "Where? I don't see anything." "Right there, at the end of the..." I froze. Looking out, I saw no one was there. "What the... She was right there!" "Who? What do you mean she?" "Jen." "Who's Jen?" my mother asked, now joining my father's side. "Is she someone from school?" "How do you know she did it?" Dad asked. "She told me, and she was covered in blood." "Did she say why she did it?" I shook my head. It wasn't a complete lie. I really wasn't entirely sure as to why. Though, of course, I had already started forming at least a half-concocted conspiracy as to her motive. "Where does she live?" "I don't know," I replied, realizing now that there was no real hope of trying to turn her in. Again, I wasn't exactly lying here. Truthfully, I sent her away. I didn't know where she was living. Probably nowhere, but how the hell was I supposed to be able to explain that without divulging to the fact that she technically wasn't even a real person? I could tell, though, that my answers weren't exactly cutting it either. "Son," Dad said, ruffling my hair and sighing. There's no one out there. But she was right, sweetie. It's okay, Mom said, wrapping her arms around me. You're not in trouble here. It's all right. They'll find who did it, and then you can go back to playing outside again. I wanted to protest. Hell, I wanted to shake them both, screaming at them until they believed me and did something. But at the same time, what the hell was I supposed to expect? I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. What would you do if I told you that a person I made out of mud magically came to life and just killed somebody? Chances are, at best, you'd tell me to quit smoking whatever it was I was jacked up on, and at worst, you'd try to have me admitted to the 7th floor. I went back to my room and immediately threw myself in bed. I wanted to cry, but didn't. Instead, I just laid there, thinking of what I'd done. Mom said it wasn't my fault, but how could it not be? I created her, and I knew I had to destroy her. The question, then, was how? How was I supposed to kill something that wasn't even really alive? I'd already seen that apparently guns won't work, and I didn't figure knives would do any better. Then I got to thinking about how mud falls apart in running water. I also knew that a creek ran through the woods behind my house. Of course, how was I going to pull that off? I mean, she wasn't going to willingly hop into a creek to her death, right? That's when I concocted a plan. I could trick her, tell her I wanted to play with her by the creek, and then, when the right moment arrives, one little push and bam, Jen would be no more. It was a bit of a long shot, sure, but it was the only plan I got. The only thing I had to figure out then was when I'd be able to try and execute my plan, given that I wasn't allowed outside, as well as not knowing where Jen even was anyway. It turns out I wouldn't actually have to wait long for my opportunity to present itself. Though it wasn't at all how I wished for it to come. Lord works in mysterious ways, right? Well, in my case, it's more like painful ways. It happened while I was walking home from the bus the next afternoon. I had made it about 4 or 5 yards away from the bus stop when, from behind one of the trees, Triton jumped out, swinging a stick and cracking me square in the nose. I almost instantly blacked out, but not before hearing him say, "I hope you like sleeping with fish, bitch boy." I felt like I'd been out for at least an hour, even though I knew it couldn't have been more than maybe 15 minutes. When I did wake up, I was being dragged along in the woods. My head was swimming and everything was all blurry. Eventually, I stopped moving and I could hear the rushing of the creek from my left. Then I heard footsteps approaching, and I looked over to see Trenton walking up to me with a rope in his hands. "Any last words?" he said coldly as he began tying my wrists together. "What are you doing?" "Flushing pieces of shit like you where it belongs." He pointed to the creek. Panic flooded through me instantly. "Trenton, wait!" I cried, squirming pathetically. "Please, don't do this! I know who killed Blake!" "Of course you do," he replied, now binding my ankles together. I knew nothing I said was going to reach him. Once I had my feet tied together, he began dragging me towards the creek. I struggled as hard as I possibly could, but it was no use. Trident used to be in the Boy Scouts when he was younger, which unfortunately for me meant he knew exactly what he was doing when it came to tying me up where I had no chance of getting loose. We were about a foot away when we suddenly stopped. "What are you looking at?" Trident barked. When I arched my neck up, my blood almost froze solid. There, standing at the edge of the creek, was Jen. She stood, pointing at Trenton before thrusting her arms outward. "Oh no." "Move," Trenton demanded, "unless you want to go for a swim too." She thrusted her arms out again before stomping towards Trenton. He drew out his pocket knife. Fine then. Tren, run! But it was too late. In 2 seconds, Tridden charged for Jen, ready to embed his knife in her, when she caught him with a backhand that sent him flying backwards. He was back on his feet in an instant, readying for another assault. He charged her again, this time being met with Jen's brick-like foot to his face. This caused him to lose the knife, sending it landing near me. He staggered backwards, dazed. That's when Jen started towards him and sent a hard right blocky fist straight into his stomach. This caused Tridden to crumble to the ground, clutching his stomach and wheezing. Seeing the knife blade still out, I grabbed it and began trying to free my legs while watching Jen proceed to stomp on Tridden's chest, causing him to convulse violently. It took me almost a full minute to saw my way through the knot, but I finally managed to free my legs. Jen was now hunching over Tridden with one hand pressed on his chest and raising her other hand to begin smashing his face in like she'd done to Blake. Stop! She looked over to me, her fists still raised. Let him go! She looked down at Tridden and back to me. I slowly started walking towards her. Let him go, Jen. Let him go, and we can go play Power Rangers, okay? She stood up and cocked her head to the right. Tridden was still convulsing. Though they were becoming weaker and weaker, I came closer, holding up hands. It's okay, I said as I approached. It'll just be you and me. We can be friends again. Just a little bit closer. She then pointed to me and touched her rib again. That's right. Friends. I was now only a foot from her. She outstretched her arms for a hug, when in one fluid motion, I charged forward, shoulder ramming her with all the strength I possessed. She stumbled backwards into the rushing current behind her. Almost immediately, her feet were being dissolved, washed away by the current, and the rest of her soon began to fall apart as well. I began hearing sirens in the distance, along with the barking of dogs. I realized it was the police looking for me. And just before Jen was gone completely, she pointed to the remaining stub of one arm at me while touching her rib with the other. Goodbye, Jen. I then turned to Tridden. He laid completely still, no longer convulsing or wheezing. When I checked him for a pulse, my own heart almost stopped. He was gone. When they found me, I was hunched over Trenton, frantically pushing on his chest, trying to give him CPR. This caused the blood to get on my hands, which would have been fine, except that I also still held the knife in them. And so, the way it looked, my hands still bound together, holding the knife and pushing down on his bloody body, I had just killed Tridden. From there, the events kind of run together, blurring a bit. Most of it outside of the immediate aftermath is mostly just history now. I was taken into police custody and questioned about both Tridden and Blake's murder. I told them the truth, or tried to at least. I could tell they weren't buying it. Regardless, I was let go when they found no evidence for either that pointed to me. After this, my folks forced me to start seeing a shrink. They, too, thought I'd actually killed them out of rage. They were worried that I was becoming a psychopath, that it caused me to end up like Ronnie. Anytime I tried to tell them or the shrink what happened, it just reinforced this belief, believing I was using Jen as a crazy split personality or something. Eventually, I stopped trying to fight them and just went along with it. I figured, why not? It was a lot easier than beating a dead horse trying to explain events I couldn't prove. I killed Blake and Trenton. They tormented me. Plus, being that I had no friends, I created one in my head in the form of Jen. They beat me up in my backyard, so I blacked out, turning into Jen, and smashed Blake's face in with a rock or a brick. Then I did the same thing when Trenton tried to drown me in the creek. For years, that exact story cycled in my head verbatim. And you know, when you tell and repeat something like this to yourself for long enough, you'll find that it becomes real. It becomes the truth. That's how it was for me anyways. In any case, the beginning and the end was the same. I created Jen to be my friend. Blake and Trenton were dead, murdered by Jen. And in the end, I destroyed Jen. Whether or not Jen was in my head the entire time didn't matter after a while. My life eventually went on. I grew up, got through school with a degree in IT, and even found a job at a tech company. I found my own place, and along the way, I even started dating the sweetest girl I'd ever known, Amy. And through it all, I kept myself sane by assuring myself that Jen was gone. I'd never see her again. This was all true until yesterday. I'd gotten a text from Amy's sister while at work that Amy was in the hospital after getting into a huge wreck. After rushing to the hospital, I found her in a hospital bed, engulfed in casts and covered in bruises. When I asked what had happened, her sister became hysterical and said something that brought everything back to me in a torrential flood. She was standing there in the middle of the road. Then out of nowhere, she used her hands to smash the hood of the car in. She? I asked, feeling dread prickling down my spine. Who? I don't know. She was all covered in mud or something, and her fists were huge. And I wasn't crazy after all. Fortunately, the doctors say that Amy is expected to recover in the next couple of days. I'm staying with her here at the hospital. Yes, to look after her, but also because I don't feel safe now alone at home. This was only yesterday. That means not only is Jill still alive and real, but she's not far away either. It's me she wants. It always was. I gave her life, and I tried to take it from her. In desperation, I used violence to create her to be my friend. I taught her to use violence to gain my friendship. And now, she's back to do it again. I only wanted to make friend, but instead, I made a monster.